Welcome to Jim White's webinar series. Jim has been investing, coaching executives, and turning around companies for over 30 years. Now your host, Dr. Jim White.
Hello, this is Jim White. It is June the 23rd, 2020, and welcome to part 7 of my critical thinking series. Let's do a quick review before we move to this week's session, shall we? Last week we discussed, the first thing I should say we discussed was we talked about evaluate information or evaluating information, and we talked about making assumptions, and this big one was watch out for the biases and ask clarifying questions. And then we went through a SWOT analysis briefly, and I encourage you to spend some more time on this last week's session as well as other sessions as we continue to use each session as building blocks, right? Each session becomes a building block, and as you know, this is a 12 session series, and at the end of the 12th session, we will bring it all together. So once again, evaluate the information we talked about last week, making assumptions, big deal, making assumptions, and watch out for the biases and ask clarifying questions. That's a big deal. You know my word now, right? Big deal. And the SWOT analysis. Now, this week, we're going to talk about the benefits of critical thinking. So we'll pull it all together. We'll make it come together here. The benefits of critical thinking. And the first one we're going to talk about is being more persuasive, right? Or the benefits of critical thinking. If I can talk this evening, then we'll talk about being more persuasive. And then we're going to talk about better communication. Then we're going to talk about better problem solving. And then we're going to spend some time on increased emotional intelligence. That's a big one. And we're going to do all of this in 30 minutes, right? So let's get ahead. But before we do, it's been another interesting week in the United States, right? COVID-19 continues to raise her ugly head. And I think we all know, but a lot of people doesn't seem to realize it's not over, right? And I see people as the areas starts opening up, and different discussions I'm having with people about the challenges of wearing the mask. But you know, out of courtesy for other people, wearing the mask and the PPP. Is anything other than, if you're not doing that, in my opinion, is disrespectful to others. And so we've got to protect each other, right? So I encourage everybody, as uncomfortable as this, is continue. If we do that together, then we can start opening up better. If we don't use protection of PPP, you know, this thing is going to come back and bite us severely. Now, not only is it a challenge for the medical community and obviously all the fatalities as a result of COVID-19, not only in the United States, but around the globe, but the damage it does to the economy. So we've got to be keenly aware that if we do not be reliant and self-discipline is probably a better word to use. And if we keep having these spikes, it's going to continue to eat away at the economy. And right now, it's a roller coaster ride. You combine that with the political climate that continues, in my opinion, to erode our values. And it's really a challenge. So, and I also want to encourage everybody, do not forget, vote. Okay, now let's talk about benefits of critical thinking. As I said, we've already determined why critical thinking is important. And we know in particular that critical thinking helps us make better decisions. makes better decisions, and to rationally apply information, right? While there are many benefits of critical thinking, in this session, we're going to examine the four as we've already discussed. That goes back into tell them what you're going to tell them and tell them again, right? So the four are being more persuasive, better communication, better problem solving, increased emotional intelligence, right? So being more persuasive. Persuasiveness is the characteristic of being able to influence others. Persuasiveness is the characteristic of being able to influence others. We normally think of salespeople and politicians when we hear the word persuasive, right? However, all managers, parents, spouses, other professionals, we use the ability to persuade on a daily basis. Anytime we want to have others accept our ideas, right? We've got to communicate and we've got to be persuasive when we're presenting those ideas. We do so through the power of the ability to persuade. How will critical thinking make us more persuasive, you might ask? Well, it is because critical thinking is a deliberate or thoughtful process, right? This is session 7. We've given you a lot of information, and the people that join us regularly every week, and I want to thank everybody that does that. I want to thank the new people that's joining us each and every week. So we want to thank you. We want to welcome you. So it is because critical thinking is a deliberate or thoughtful process. And the more deliberate we are, the better we are in expressing our assumptions or ideas and persuading others. That's a mouthful, right? We're going to come back and bring that back together as we continue to go through the other characteristics this evening. Now, the next one, we could spend weeks and weeks on this one. Communication, better communication, critical thinking, and that's what we're talking about, the benefits of critical thinking. And one of the benefits that we just discussed was being persuasive. And then the next one is better communication. There's over $4 trillion, believe it or not, lost in commerce as a result of poor communication. Critical thinking improves the communication for some of the same reasons that it improves being persuasive. Critical thinking improves communication for some of the same reasons that it improves being persuasive. Now, many of these same factors we use to improve our persuasive abilities also makes us better communicators in general. For instance, the use of analogies and metaphors are a great persuasion tool and general communication technique. Metaphors, we speak in pictures, right? Or analogies, or telling a story, be able to make a story come alive and to be able to communicate that way. In addition to helping us in using language more persuasively, critical thinking also helps us use language with more clarity. Now we're going to talk about Jim's 7 C's of communication. And for my staff that are tuning in live, or staff's going to be watching this video, they have this. They hear me talk about this pretty regularly, but we can never talk about it enough. So I created these 7 C's of communication a long time ago. We're going to go through theirs. Communication. I don't think there's a day goes by that I'm not talking to my senior staff and we're talking about our problem is a lack of communication. Our problem is lack of communication, lack of planning, lack of critical thinking, right? So 7 C's. Number 1 of the 7 C's, be clear. When writing or speaking to someone, be clear about your goal or message, right? What is your purpose in the communication? That's what we got to find out. What is the purpose in the communication with this person? If you're not sure, then your audience is not going to be sure either, right? So as I'm preparing for each and every session, I'm always thinking, what can I do in order to communicate better? What can I do to tell the story? What can I do to make this content come alive? Because I think everybody would admit it's content can be pretty dry, right? What can I do to make it come alive? And what can I do in the number 2 in the 7 C's is being concise. When you're concise in your communication, you stick to the point and keep it brief if you can. So you notice when I start off each and every week, I go by what we discussed last week and I go down to the point. Bullet 1, 2, 3, 4, right? You stick to the point and be brief. Your audience doesn't want to read the 6 sentences. And again, I always make reference to this. The people get to know me, and I use this term a lot. I'm not looking for the great American novel here, right? We just got to get to the point, right? But you got to do it in such a way that it's concise. Now, there's a few things that go through my mind each and every time, before each and every session, or when I would I'm doing a radio show, or I'm doing a TV show, where I'm preparing to do a speaking engagement before I got on stage. I'm asking myself, and I'm reminding myself to communicate your message. And I say, ask self, are there any adjectives or filler words that you can delete? Are there any adjectives or filler words that can be deleted? Can you often eliminate words like, for instance, or you see, or definitely, kind of? That one drives me nuts. Or literally, basically, or I mean. Those words are what I call filler words, and they just fill up space. It really doesn't do anything to communicate the message, right? Are there any unnecessary sentences? Are there anything unnecessary? When I was preparing for this series, I went through and I go over and over and over, and I said, what can I do to what can I pull out, or what can I add to be able to make it more meaningful to you? Because after all, the only reason I do this every week is to try to give you some tools that you can use immediately to help improve your personal and your professional life. Now, and I always ask the question, have you repeated the point several times? Well, that one is a sticky point, and when I bring that up and I'm on stage, or I get an opportunity, I make a point of that, because you that follow me regularly, you know that I'll often go back and repeat things. And it's important to repeat things, but at the same time, if you're doing it with a purpose and you got a different inflection, you can do that with with purpose, if you will. Have you repeated the point several times? Okay. The other number 3 in the 7 C's is concrete. That's the word I use, concrete. When your message is concrete, your audience has a clear picture. That's of what you're telling them. I want you to have a clear picture. They are details, but not too many details, right? And they're vivid facts. They're going to come to life. And there's laser-like focus. That's what I do each and every week, because I want to be able to give you this content. I give you a lot of content, and I want to do it under 30 minutes or less. And that's always a challenge. So I got this clock built in, and I get to see them because I got so much content, I got to be careful not to go off on my tangents, right? And is the message solid? Number 4 in the 7 C's is correct. Now, again, we could spend hours and weeks on that. When your communication, I should say, is correct, your audience will be able to understand it. And correct communication is also error-free communication. Error-free communication. Make sure your message is correct by asking yourself the following questions. Do the technical terms that I use, do the technical terms that you use fit your audience, right? And the level of education or knowledge. The other question I always ask, have you checked your writing? If I'm writing, have you checked your writing? Now, the next thing in 7 C's is coherent. When your communication is coherent, it's logical. All points are connected and they are relevant to the main topic. This is the reason the critical thinking process is so important. We had a viewer, I'm trying to find the right word here, so bear with me, excuse me. We had a viewer that sent in a question, and the question was, how do you teach critical thinking to children? And I think that, well, we do what we're doing here, and then you have exercises. And I was just speaking to Lily that makes all this happen just before we went on air. And I was talking about we'll see what we can do to maybe put together a little workbook at the end of this session to be able to make available to you so you can use it, because I just love the question. So it's teaching them what we've been doing for the past week, and then developing exercises, and it's practice, and it's called mastery, right? We've talked about mastery in the past as being able to master the ability. So we'll see if we can pass on some information there. So anyway, number 5 is being coherent. When your communication is coherent, it's logical. Like I said, all points are connected and relevant to the main topic. Right? I'm repeating myself, right? And then the tone and the flow of the text is consistent. The tone and the flow of the text is consistent. Number 6 of the 7 C's of communication is complete. Complete. And is it a complete message? The audience has everything they need to be informed. Do the audience have everything they need? If applicable action is required, what is it? Does your message include a call to action? Always have a call to action. And I know a lot of you that's viewing this you probably have heard this 1,000 times, right? So bear with us if you have, and maybe you're hearing it with a different set of eyes and ears this time, right? And that's what I experience. You hear the message in a different way. So does your message include a call to action, so that your audience clearly knows what you want them to do? Clearly know. Well, I can tell you, for us that lead companies, and or for you that are maybe starting your career or mid-level in your career, I can tell you, this is golden. This is the golden ticket. Audience, have you included? Does your message include a call to action? And to be able to have a call to action. A lot of times before I start a meeting, I will say to the group, we may be around a conference table, and I will say, what's your expectation at the end of this meeting? And then we time everything. What is your expectation? What do you want? Or if I'm on a phone call, when somebody will call me and I have a conversation, I'll ask the same question. What was your expectation for this phone call? What would you like for your takeaway to be, right? So, and then have you included all relevant information? All the relevant, the contact names, right address, all the information that's so critical. And number 7 of the 7 C's is courtesy. Well, courtesy communication is open, it's friendly, and it's honest. Now, for a lot of you know, my communication can be straight on, and sometimes it may not appear to be as courteous as it should, only because of a point. It's not that I don't know what we're doing, that it's like we know exactly. So that's the difference. Know it versus just being a jerk, right? Understanding exactly to have the courteous. But the most important thing is being open and honest with your communication. There are no hidden or passive or any other undertones there in your communication. And you keep the reader's viewpoint in mind, and you watch the audience. And sometimes, like I said, unfortunately, you got to communicate, and you got to be able to communicate in ways that some of your audiences doesn't know, other than bang between the eyes sometimes, right? And I say that in a loving sort of way. But it's as much as you can, you got to have the audience in mind and being courteous. Now, it reminds me of a story, a psychology author named, I think Paul Ekman, I believe it was, talks about lying truthfully, and that's a strong word, right? But I think, and I'm going to stay out of the politics this evening, but I think we got a lot of that going on in the nation today. And in one of his books, this terms that he used literally means when you're telling the truth while leaving the listener with the opposite impression, right? This happens when we cast a preposterous act or a preposterous statement, right? So that the listener believes you are joking, right? And we see a lot of that, especially in today, coming up from our politicians. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about this evening is, better problem solving. That's another benefit. Critical thinking and problem solving are closely related and are almost intertwined. Sometimes we say that to solve logic problems, we must use our critical thinking skills. Now, in fact, logic, critical thinking, and problem solving use some of the same cognitive processes, right? Cognitive processes. Critical thinkers use their problem solving skills. And that would be one. If there's one thing that I could communicate or encourage with all of the companies that I have the pleasure to lead, is one of the issues that we have at every level is critical thinkers being able to problem solve, right? And to be able to communicate very clearly. So this particular section, we should cut it out, paste it someplace so everybody sees it every morning, noon, and night, right? Until we get good at problem solving, at communicating. So critical thinkers use their problem solving skill and not just their intuition to make decisions or draw conclusions, right? Now, I think last week I mentioned the term team consultant. It's a process that I created many, many years ago. And like I said, it's a 10-minute process. And that's where it's very controlled and how you can, under 10 minutes, in a controlled environment, if you can have a facilitator and you got, say, 4 or 5 people, it's kind of a brainstorming process where you can actually, have your brain under control about your best ideas going to about 10 minutes or less. Anybody would like to have more information on that, just send us an email and I'll be happy to give it to it. But it's very detailed here, but I just wanted to bring it up to say that in critical thinking and problem solving and communication and being persuasive, in looking at logic and all of those things, there's another tool that we have that will serve you well. So if you'd like to have it, we'd be happy to share it with you. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about this evening is called increased emotional intelligence. I think a lot of us of a certain age probably remember Daniel Goleman's book, which I think is fantastic, some years ago. And I really, really support it. And I've always been fascinated by human behavior and been fascinated by how the brain works. And so this particular area that we're discussing, emotional intelligence, like I said, I could spend a week on that as well. So with all these weeks, we'd be together for a long time, right? So let's briefly dig into emotional intelligence. What is emotional intelligence first? And how does critical thinking help increase our emotional intelligence, right? Well, emotional intelligence is identified as the ability to access and control the emotions of oneself. I think you that have been following us for some time and you work with me, man, I tell you what, I'm a behavioral type. We support the DISC language, which is a great behavioral tool. I'm of the behavior code high D. I'm just like great communication, high emotion, high energy, problem solving. It's just get it done. So accessing and controlling the emotions of oneself. Now, let's take a deeper look at this, deeper dive here. Emotional intelligence is being what I call heart smart. You've heard me say, or at least you that have been in my workshops, connecting the heart and the head, heart and the head, heart and the head. So you heard me say that over and over and over, connecting the heart and the head. As opposed to, and be careful here because I've got some kickback when I've used this term in the past, book smart. I support education, but what I'm saying here, you got that combination, connecting the heart and the head, right? It becomes a unique skill set. Learning and studying emotional intelligence and the critical thinking process is absolutely going to help your emotional intelligence improve. So critical thinking helps increase emotional intelligence, because one of the characteristics of a critical thinker, as we discussed, 2 sessions ago, is self-awareness, right? Also, critical thinkers know how and when to use their emotions. For again, there is no mistake when I'm communicating. When I'm involved in the communication, there is no trial. There is no error. I am very clear what we're doing. It is under control, and it is for a fact. And it really is. It's a skill that I've developed for years and years and years. It's critical thinking. So critical thinkers know how and when to use their emotions, such as empathy in making decisions, right? The more a person uses his or her critical thinking skills, the better, I'm going to use the word, better adapt they should become at identifying and understanding and managing their emotions. Now, that's worth repeating. The more a person uses his or her critical thinking skills, the better adapt they become at identifying and understanding and managing their emotions. Emotional intelligence is consists of 4 abilities. And I'm just going to lay out the abilities due to the time, and I recognize we're getting close on the time that I want to stay under the 30 minutes. So emotional intelligence in general consists of 4 abilities: self-awareness, which we've talked about, self-management, social awareness, and that goes back when I was talking about PPP, social awareness. That is emotional intelligence. And that's one of the things, if I could get on the broadcast and speak to 340 million people, that's what I would be saying. Social awareness, and relationship management, right? Relationship management. Now, we all know there's a difference between knowing and applying the skill sets, right? For instance, all of the skills of emotional intelligence, for the most part, is quite obvious. However, in the heart of an argument, or when feeling extremely overwhelmed, it can be quite challenging to remember all of these steps, right? And that's where you got to have control. And that's what I was talking about earlier. I know exactly what's happening. So it's a mastery. Stress in particular can hijack the best laid plans. Well, that happens to me as well sometimes. I am a human just like everybody else. I blow it, I mess it up just like everybody else. But I'm a student, and I try to get better each and every time I do something like that. A key to applying emotional intelligence technique is to develop some strategy to remember these skills. I used to have it on the back, all of these things on the back of 3.5 or 5 card years ago. And right now I got it in little notes here, right? So I use this stuff. I'm always looking at it to remember these skills. Some people find deep breathing, and I do that a lot. It's one of the things that we were taught when I was in the military was deep breathing. Now, that's it. That's an abrupt, right? That's it. That's what we wanted to lay out tonight. And let's just give you a quick preview for next week. Next week, I'm going to be talking about changing your perspective. It's changing your perspective. Going to be talking about limitations of your point of view. That's going to be very interesting. We're going to talk about considering other viewpoints. What a concept, right? And we're going to come back and we're going to talk about influences on bias. Influences on bias. And then we're going to talk about, the last thing we'll talk about last week is talk about what do you do when new information arrives, right? So I'm going to leave you with that. As always, thank you for spending time with us. Thank you for your interest. And please pass on the links and invite your friends. Like I said, we're doing this for one reason, to help you to obtain better skills that's going to help you in your personal and your professional life. I'm going to leave you with this quote from Albert Einstein. And he said, let me make sure I get this right. We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them, right? You've heard it a million times, right? So critical thinking skills, that's what we're talking about. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest. Please be safe, and we will talk to you next week. Good evening.
Thank you for your participation and interest in Jim White's webinar series. To stay in touch with Jim, go to www.authorjimwhite.com.